Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. This is part 2 of my conversation with Max Dashu, feminist historian, author, and artist, founder of the Suppressed Histories Archives. We're talking about women in Greek mythography. Her presentation, Sacred Stones, which looks at female iconography in rock art across the globe. And we'll touch on the winter solstice at the end of this podcast. So first off, can you tell us about Aletheia?
Aletheia, they think this is the name of a Cretan goddess. It's not originally a Hellenic word. And she had a sacred cave at Amnisos, which is not too far from Knossos in, what they call the capital of the ancient Cretans. And so this was a birthing cave. And Cretans, the cave shrines, if you read anything about Cretan archaeology, they're all about the cave shrines and the peak shrines. So the temples themselves, of course, were sacred places, but there are all these natural features, what I call nature sanctuaries of the land. And so the caves were one of them. And what they have found is that from Neolithic times, going through classical Cretan times, and then going past that into Greek domination, and past that into the period of Christian rule, there are women bringing offerings. So there's this wide range of archaeological finds in those caves that are, and many of them have to do, they're figurines of birthing women. And a lot of them will show the woman with the doula behind her, which isn't really the appropriate name because it means slave in Greek, but this has been adopted by moderns as the birth assistant, okay? And then the midwife catching the baby. So there's a strong birth association there. There's also an association with veneration of the dead. And one thing when I'm thinking about it, about caves, is that up on that mountain above Delphi, is a cave that's called the Corcyra cave, the Corcyrian cave. And some scholars think that that's even older than Delphi. It's a gigantic cavern up there on the mountain. And there is from Neolithic times offerings at this cave. And they know that in historical times, there was dream incubation going on there. So people would go up and sleep in that cave with intention in order to get answers to whatever their pressing question was, or maybe to be healed. And so that was all going on. And then there's later traditions that are referring to nymphs called the Thruiai, who were connected with divinatory power. And so people would pray to them. And there were stories that connected them with Delphi down below, but also with this older cave. And Apollo takeover stories happen there too. He doesn't conquer them. He eventually marries these nymphs. So that establishes some kind of claim according to the patriarchal mentality. But caves are just, there's a lot.
You have many offerings and many videos available, and also many talks that you give and lectures on specific mythologies from different cultures throughout the ages. You have a Sacred Stones presentation that is wonderful. It really focuses on concentric circles, spirals, fulvic images in their different incarnations throughout the world. And oftentimes there's a honeycomb sort of like pattern on
scooping out of rock, scraping of the rock out into cup shapes, kind of.
Yes. Can you talk about this? It's so interesting to me because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's just everywhere, all over the world. And I oftentimes will just look at a documentary. I'm like, oh, let me learn more about the Picts or this pre-Stonehenge area or Bruneboyne. And I just keep feeling like people are missing the mark again and again and again. It's like, that looks like two breasts, but nobody will say anything about it. Or that's clearly a vulva. And this clearly is an image of a woman in this powerful form and position in society with her regalia. It's so surprising that the lens through which a lot of archaeologists and historians are viewing the past seems so disconnected from the obvious symbolism and iconography. There seems to be this pervasive attitude and denial that omits the empowering aspects of these earlier forms of the goddess and earlier versions of myths throughout the world. When we look at like the matrilineal cultures that exist today, the cultures that still have elements of female reverence and if not worship, then deep respect and all sorts of rituals and traditions that are still carrying on it, we can look at those to understand our past.
Analogies are really important because this is all, I mean, when we're looking at the ancient rock traditions, there's a lot of pattern recognition because, as you say, there's the spirals, the concentric circles. Vulvas are some of the oldest iconography on the planet. We see them in Paleolithic Australia and Europe and South America and North America, just like all these really archaic layers of human culture. They're part of those patterns. So there's a meaning there that people are connecting with in the bones of the earth, And so that's something important to see our commonalities because this is at a historical level where there's no written record. We only have the iconographic record to go by, right? And so, that's tricky because we don't know even what language a lot of times these people spoke, much less what the elements of their culture were, what they said about the rock patterns that they engraved or what they did around them ceremonially. But we do know some things that people were scraping out rock dust and they were using it. And we have some living examples of cultures that were using rock dust for conception, like the baby rocks of the Pomo in California, or further north in the same region, we have them used as rainmaking. And there's scraping out of rock dust in monuments in rock in the Sahara and lots of other places. So we can see that there are ceremonial things that are still connected with, that why are there hollows and why do some of the female figures, like there's this amazing rock petroglyph in Libya that has a two-horned female figure who's seated with her legs crossed and her hands down toward the vulva, kind of like a Shilnagig. And where her vulva appears, you can't really see it because people keep coming there and scraping out rock dust from that place, which is mythically potent of her body. Okay, so there's this potency of maybe the ancestral woman. We don't know if she was regarded as a goddess, what exactly, or even was that supposed to be a female shaman? We don't know, because this is something that is probably at least 8,000 years old, right? And there are other examples of that. So what I want to mention about the sacred stones is these are all visual talks, because I'm not just talking about them, I'm showing you. And you can have your own experience of them. You may have your own interpretations because I don't claim to have the definitive final word on any of this. I'm just really trying to scan the cultural record and see what those patterns are and the similarities that recur across human societies. I mean, there are some cultural things that are only specific to one place, but there are others that are shared. And I think that's really important for us, like even looking at Europe. And we lost so much in Europe in the process of Christianization. There was a war on pagans that went on for a couple thousand years, almost. And so what does Europe have in common with the rest of the world? I mean, this is something that we lost through the witch hunts and even earlier persecutions. And I think that a lot of people of European descent are lost. They're wandering in exile without knowing anything about their own authentic roots. And this is part of where cultural appropriation, that's part of the motivation for it is, well, we don't have anything, so we'll have to take theirs. And that's wrong, but there's a reason for it, and so to know and to recover that and to see, actually, look, Europe had drums, Europe had sweat houses, the Irish have the Tachan Alish, stone beehive shaped monuments that little tiny openings to keep the steam in. You have to, just like the Native American sweat lodge, you have to kneel down to crawl in and get inside of it. And the Portuguese had their pedras formosas, which were part of these beautifully carved entry points to the sweat houses. And of course, you have the Finns with their sauna. So, this is all, I think that, it's part of like a revolution of looking at the full cultural record, not just what was written down by elite men in certain cultures that actually had, scripts, hieroglyphs, alphabets, whatever, but also to see what was left in sculpture and ceramic painting and rock art and all the other things, weavings even, as they survive, is when we look at this is the direct cultural testimony from the people. And, we may not be able to say names or even to say what their philosophy was, what their religious orientation was, but they left the symbolism. And so you've got the serpentine symbolism. I'm working on an article on this right now for the archaeomythology journal. And, there are all these patterns, women like the Cretans holding up two snakes, women holding up, or a goddess like Isis holding up one snake, snake-headed women, snake-bodied women, women with snakes around their belt, women with snakes on their head or snakes for hair, and it's like, what is all this? What does it mean? I mean, this is, you can't really say. I mean, I don't think there's any one meaning. I think there's a whole, like the Pythia. It's very clear that prophetic power in the Greek world was very much tied to this imagery of the snake. And the snake, Pytho, the son of Gaia, there's a male form also that is part of this oracular power. So that was their interpretation. But in other contexts, you see snakes connected with progeneration or healing or ancestors, which goes back to progeneration because there's that spiral of newborn, grows up, procreates, lives, dies, becomes an ancestor, and is reborn. So there's that circle of regeneration. This is one reason I think the spiral is so important, is it's a basic principle of nature. Things grow in spirals. Water moves in spirals. There's all these things that
the movement of the planets is ever spiraling outward, and so it's like coming back.
Solar systems.
And I think of it as like you come full circle in the year, but you're a more evolved person than you were the year before. Mm-hmm. So
that moment of return on the spiral, because in a way, the spiral is also a circle. But so you start here and then you go around. And when you return to this point, it's not the same river. You're at a different point in time. So there you're really dealing with time-space matrix. It's energy in motion. Yeah.
Indeed. I heard on NPR recently that wassailing is back in Europe. The tradition of brewing the wine, but putting the bread in it, soaking the bread, and then putting the bread on the fruit trees as you wassail and sing for both an offering to nature, could be to the ancestors, and then of course the birds get to eat it.
The birds will love it.
More and more people are learning about the birds that get drunk on berries and different fruits that ferment naturally. Apparently they also like to seek altered states.
Mm-hmm. Elephants too. Elephants will seek out fermented fruit.
Nice.
Yeah, and the wassailing, it's a beautiful thing because it's like the traditions where people are going from house to house singing, and then they're being welcomed with hospitality, and people are offering food and drink to them, and there's a feast of lights, and there's all these things, and it's all having to do with the time of the year we're in now, with the longest nights and the shortest days, and so it's bringing light through and welcoming the return of light, which is going to increase. But that part with the song, I think, is really important. To have a shared cultural tradition where you're singing together, it's very unifying. There's something really healing about it, revivifying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was just doing an interview with Pokey, who they're a band from Poland originally. They have a whole shamanic tradition of women, herbalist witches. They were labeled witches at some point, but they were drumming. They would sing and they would drum and they would use herbal medicine. This is a commonality in all these traditions.
Yes. Yeah, and the Poles are very interesting because they have Jivanna, which is a name that's related actually to Diana, although it doesn't sound like it, but it's linguistically related to Diana. And she has a winter goddess and a summer goddess form. That's the solstices. And so in the winter, she's with wolves and, in the snow. And then in the summer, she's riding on a white stag, and her hair, the braids of her hair become mullen hag's tapers. They're burning because it's the time of the greatest fire. And they have some really interesting traditions.
Lastly, to close out this conversation for today, it's been marvelous. Thank you so much, Max Dashu, for joining us. What is your favorite aspect of the solstice tradition, if you're into the New Year thing?
The fire, and Starhawk has this wonderful thing. This is kind of a reborn tradition where they do this chant, the night, the longest night, what shall we give to the night? Mm-hmm. And then they call out all the things that they want to cast off, and they throw them into the fire and give them to the night. And so I like that idea of burning away, because you're about to enter a new cycle, right? Although I must say that in the Celtic tradition, the actual New Year is Samhain. It's the beginning of the dark, that you start the year. And so, there's different takes on all of that. I personally celebrate New Year's at the Celtic New Year's. First, there's Rosh Hashanah. My wife is Jewish, so we have Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Then we have the Celtic. Then there's January 1st, the Roman New Year. And then finally, there's Chinese New Year in February usually. And finally, we rounded out, the Persians celebrate Nowruz on March 21st, which is the beginning of the zodiacal cycle with, the beginning of Aries. So they do it astrologically. So you get that way 5 or 6 chances to start over.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Always, folks can find your book, Women in Greek Mythography, at valletta.net. And they can go to the Suppressed Histories archives online for lectures, classes, and so much more. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mazen. You can find her website at mazenmusic.com.